Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Just thinking as we chanted, there used to be, during the chanting of the opening the Dharma chant, I'd watch my teacher get all his books out, and arrange them. And later I was getting my books out and arranging them. Now I'm arranging windows on the computer. It's funny. Hi there in Zoomville, Kate and Jeff and Elizabeth and Scott. Pretty good crew out here. So welcome everybody, no matter how you're arriving. I get a lot of email, and I've made a big effort for a while to get off as many lists as I can, But I got on this one, which I seem to stay on. It's a weekly little reflection from a guy named Ryan Dowd. Somebody told me about Ryan Dowd. All I know about him are these emails I get. And he's an advocate for people who are suffering, especially people who are unhoused, addicted, and he does trainings and advises people and supports people. There's a whole column once about working with folks when they get really reactive, like if you're behind the counter or something like that, how to respond, how to de-escalate. So he usually says some interesting thing about that. Turns out a very high proportion of people on the street have traumatic brain injury. I didn't know that, but he had some statistics about that. It makes sense, right? All these things, they go wrong and they come together. But then this one, I want to share one with you. As he starts it, he says, in this week's newsletter, I want to do something different. So that got my interest. So here's Ryan Dowd. Normally, in this newsletter, I break down a scientific idea and connect it to homelessness or de-escalation. But today I just feel anxious. I feel anxious about the upcoming election. I feel anxious because I don't know how AI is going to change the world, especially for my kids. And honestly, I'm anxious about how a customer treated a stalker at the grocery store last night. When I feel like this, I turn to my collection of quotes, poems, and images I have selected for such moments. These are my kindling, small sticks and dried leaves that I toss on the fire to hold back the bitter cold and darkness. I have finally accepted that hope is the fire that warms the soul on dark nights. When I was younger, I thought I needed to keep the fire blazing at all times, a bonfire of ambition for a better world. Decades of fighting the forces of cruelty and indifference, though, have taught me something, that it isn't possible, it isn't sustainable to always burn brightly, and it isn't necessary. That the important part is just that the fire not go out. Working in a homeless shelter, I witness how hard it can be to restart that fire in a cold hearth. Not impossible, but really hard. But as long as there is a flicker, even warm coals, there is potential, there is life. So perhaps you too need to tend your fire, to add a twig or a handful of leaves. And then he shares a poem that inspires him. But I figure we each have our own something. That's good, huh? Yeah. Just need a flicker, Can relax. Feed it when we need to feed it. And I was thinking, sometimes it's just like he says, some words, an image, a teaching that helps to rekindle the fire. But sometimes words don't do it, you know? They aren't kindling. At least for me, although I have a deep habit, maybe you do too, that words probably is the best. So I sit and I journal write and I look through my ridiculous collection of half-read Dharma books and, read poetry. Sometimes it really, though, I think needs to be an experience, not words. Although, of course, words are an experience. And sometimes we just stumble into it, It's not even that deliberate. We just try to live our lives and show up, commit to what we need to do to help ourselves and each other. And suddenly there's a spark, like out of nowhere, out of the darkness. So the other morning I've been trying to jog a little more, doing pretty good, partly because my running buddy's been more available, so it's pretty dependent on each other. But anyway, the other morning I was up early, and I decided to do an early morning jog before our 7 o'clock zazen, so I trundled myself off at 6. And I don't do that often, and last time I did it, I think it was the middle of summer. So I was a little surprised, it was pretty dark. And it wasn't a problem at first, because I was riding on the roads and there were enough street lights. But I have a little loop that goes through Cornwall Park. Just this little, if you haven't been there, it's this little teeny nugget of forest, ancient forest in the middle of town. And as I went into the park, it got darker and darker, but the path is wide and I could make my way fine. I'm just kind of jogging along, feeling a little blue maybe, but not too bad, just okay. It was okay. Then suddenly I hear this weird sound, kind of a, what is that? And then with help from the little computer that was in my pocket, I found out it was the screech, the call of great horned owls. Not the hoo-hoo call, but another call that they make. 2 of them, back and forth. And I was like, wow. And then I kept jogging along, and it's actually getting somehow darker and darker. I thought, isn't the dawn supposed to come? It was getting darker and darker. Deeper woods. I could barely see. But there was a beauty in finding my way, even though I could barely see. And as I was coming out of the park, and there's a little more ambient light, enough that I could see the clouds above me, I heard the cacophonous calling of a few hundred migrating snow geese. And I was so grateful that I had learned their call, and then I noticed it, above the clouds, deep in the clouds. And then I thought about this little column I read by Ryan Dowd, and I thought, oh, this is my kindling today. Thank you, world. Thank you, other beings in our planet, for helping me. And we get help from each other. We'll explore a little more together Dogen's writing that he called Hokyoki, which it purports to be his journal from when he was getting help in China, getting help from his teacher he had met, Ruijing, getting help in his deep question, trying to keep his fire alive. And if you were here last week, you might remember we don't really know when he wrote this. It might have been written while he was in his mid-20s in China, or it might have been written late in his life, perhaps based on notes or perhaps just his memories, or perhaps as a text for him to just continue exploring the great themes of his practice, because he was a big writer. And in some way he was writing for his students and for us, but I think in many ways, maybe mostly, he was actually writing for himself, to try to understand this life and the Dharma, which is to say the same thing. So just to remind us where we were, the first section of this journal, it has 50 little sections, some longer than others. was a beautiful exchange in which he arrives at the monastery in China and sends a note to the teacher, to the abbot, big place, maybe 1,000 monks. And he explains who he is and that he is really eager to learn. He asks for help. And he has the chutzpah to ask the teacher of the big monastery, "Can I come to you privately anytime, day or night?" I'm still impressed with this, and imagining if somebody had asked me this question. I've been like, I don't know about that, buddy. Right? Or maybe I would have been more gracious than that. But he said yes, and his teacher's beautiful reply was yes. Yes, you can come informally to ask questions anytime, day or night from now on. Do not worry about formality. We can be like father and son. That must have been quite a spark for Dogen's kindling, don't you think? Can you imagine getting that reply? Wow. And then the second section was kind of a deep Dharma question about what's this stuff they talk about in Zen, and we still wonder this today, I think. Well, they're always talking about this is beyond words, what we're trying to do, beyond words. So we just sit, we just follow the schedule. In the monastery, we follow the complex routine and the many guidelines and rules. And whatever this is just emerges from that somehow. And there's no point to reading or discussing the teachings. And in fact, in the Zen training monasteries to this day, there's not a lot of study, actually. They have a library, but they don't go there much. It's mostly just doing the practice. And there's some famous lines about this. That Zen is beyond words or letters. Completely beyond. And Dogen thinks this is a little weird, So he says to the teacher, what's up with this? And the answer is kind of neat. It's kind of a both and answer. That yes, experience is important and central, but it's only an experience that you perceive in a certain way, so you also need teachings. That it's both. Teachings, experience, teachings, and they inform each other. And his teacher points this out in this kind of odd metaphor of saying, if you don't think this way, it's like you don't really get it about change, you don't really get it about birth and death, and so on and so forth. But that's kind of what he says. It's both. And he says that there's also a misunderstanding we may have that because these teachings point to something kind of beyond comparison, beyond this and that, you might foolishly think that there's no progress and nothing happens. He says that's a big mistake. It's not that there's no progress, is the way they say it. Double negatives are a favorite technique in Zen. Because you can't exactly say it's this. You can't exactly say it's that. So it's not this and not that. Kind of both, and kind of both isn't right either. Then anytime our words, which we do need, try to make sense of things, they miss the mark a little bit. So we need practice. Practice changes us, and don't worry about that. Just practice. And we see here the seeds of Dogen's later teachings on practice enlightenment as one process, enlightenment practice as one process. And we also see Suzuki Roshi's mirroring and echoing this 800 years later with his teachings about practice with great sincerity, practice with a lot of heart, and with no idea that you're going to get anything out of it. And yet it also changes us. It also changes us. Perhaps slowly, perhaps we don't notice the changes as they're happening. Maybe somebody else notices and points it out, and we're like, really? I feel like the same old me, And Suzuki Roshi's famous image, and I don't know if he made this one up, most of the images he uses he got from traditional teaching somewhere, but this one I've never found. He says the process of practice is like walking through the fog. I guess it's a really light fog. You hardly notice it is foggy, but eventually you realize that your robes are soaked through. The practice has permeated your heart. So that's just to catch us up. So the next question Dogen asked his teacher, according to his journal, is very practical. I read this question, I'm like, oh good, let's get down to brass tacks here. Dogen asks, when we students practice the way, how should we cultivate the mind in the midst of ordinary activity? While walking, while sitting, while standing, while lying down. How do we take the practice off the cushion, right? It's a good question. So here's what the teacher says. When Bodhidharma came from India, so when this style of practice came to China, the body and mind of Buddha Dharma truly entered China. Here are some things to pay attention to when you undertake Dharma study. Don't spend a long time sick in bed. What? Don't travel far away. Don't read or chant too much. Don't argue too much. That's good. Don't overwork. Oh, are you listening, Tim? And then he goes on with a very long list of things to avoid. A lot of them are dietary, actually, about what we should and shouldn't eat. There's a lot of details about what kind of clothes we should wear. A few feel wise and important. A few seem a little silly from our point of view now. A few seem maybe a little derogatory, and a few actually do seem a bit sexist. Person of his time and all that nonsense. So what do we do with such a list? I thought this is an interesting question. Like, here's this very specific list, answering Dogen's question, not with like sort of approaches, but things to avoid. And I was thinking, well, my first impulse is to just ignore the stuff that doesn't seem applicable to 21st century America with consciousness of, oppression and justice, And then I think, well, is that always so good, That's just me, with my own particular point of view, picking and choosing from these teachings of a revered teacher in days gone by. And there's some of them I actually absolutely don't want to listen to, like there's one on no music, and no dancing. So we won't go there. But here's a selection nonetheless. I wouldn't want to just whitewash this. I'm not going to read you the whole list because it would take quite a while. Mostly I condensed the dietary restrictions a little bit. But there's still a bunch of them. Okay, you ready to find out what you shouldn't do so you can practice in everyday life? Well, don't eat leeks and onions. Don't eat meat. Yeah, they got a problem with onions in Buddhism. I'm not sure why. Garlic too. Don't drink too much milk or honey. Don't drink alcohol. Well, there's a point there. Don't listen to singing or music. Don't look at mutilated bodies. Don't look at pornography or talk about sex. This was like 1224 in China. Don't wear dirty clothes. Don't visit slaughterhouses. Don't drink aged tea or take medicines for mental disease like those ones they sell at Mount Tiantai, which is the mountain he's on. I guess he doesn't like the local pharmacy. Don't pay any attention to matters of fame and fortune. Well, that's wise. Here's a weird one, though. Don't be associated with eunuchs or hermaphrodites. Don't have too much sugar or candy. Don't wear quilted clothes, but wear only plain cotton clothes. So don't get fancy, I guess. Don't pay attention to shouting and loud noises or watch herds of pigs. I don't know what happens if you watch a herd of pigs. Don't stare at big fish. Maybe Ruijing had a really rich kind of life experience, and he's been distracted by many things over his life. And one time he was, waiting for the dentist, and he got absorbed by the big fish or something. Don't look at the ocean. Oh. Don't look at bad pictures. Don't play with puppets. Instead, look at mountains and streams. So, okay, it ends on a good note. Look at mountains and streams, just like the name of our temple. So I don't know about all these details, and it does seem, like we shouldn't just kind of write it all off. We should ponder this a bit, but at the same time, not be too bound by another time and place. And try to look, I think, what's the bigger picture here? And that seems pretty clear. Live a life of restraint, Be aware of what you bring in with your senses. Choose, be in choice. And listen to our hearts and our suffering and our joy. What brings more light, And pay attention to distractions and learn how to move on and let them go. And it really matters. It really matters what we're paying attention to, what we're eating, what we're wearing, what we're doing, what we're taking in. And then after this long list, he gives this sweet little kind of closing. Illuminate the mind with ancient teachings and read sutras that contain complete meaning. Monks who practice zazen should always have clean feet. When the body and mind are confused, chant the beginning of the text called the Bodhisattva precepts. So if you get confused, you know what to do. Chant the precepts. Good advice. Then he has kind of a P.S. Ruijing then said, the way Dogen wrote it, Ruijing then said, don't associate with small-minded people. So I, Dogen, asked, who are small-minded people? Ruijing said, those who are full of greed. So it matters what company you keep. So that's an important teaching too. And we don't always get to choose who we're with. So we accept whoever we're interacting with and try to be bodhisattvas and be helpful. But we do have some choice about who we hang around with, right? So particularly avoid greedy people, he says. Confused people. And I was thinking, sometimes our friends just reinforce our insanity, right? So being careful about our friends, who should our friends be? Who should we spend our time with? But really, it all comes back to this bigger question, is what are we really? Who are we really? This self that we perceive, this me, so familiar but so mysterious, right? We don't know who we are, but there's some sense of me. And even though we know we change, and once in a while we kind of catch ourselves in the act, oh, look at that, I'm different now. Still, there's this feeling that seems unchanged, right? So are we just confused, conditioned beings? Are we Buddha? If there is growth through practice, what will happen in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years of practice or lifetimes of practice? Will we just get polished up and eventually forget about all this confused self and just be a glowing Buddha? We don't know. We really don't know. Dogen didn't know, so he asked his teacher. And this deeper theme always makes me think of this wonderful poem from Katagiri Roshi. And I've read this a lot of times, so if you're tired of it, I'm sorry, but it's worth hearing again. And I think just like I believe Dogen's writings were, Katagiri wasn't a big writer, actually. They have a couple of books of his teachings, but they're kind of the typical Dharma book where they recorded his talks and edited them, and he glanced at it and said, yeah, good enough, and publish it, But he wrote this poem, and it wasn't discovered till after he died, so I think it was he wrote it for himself. It's his way of trying to understand and explore this weird situation we're in, We're used to it, so it doesn't always seem as weird as it is, but it's profoundly weird to be a person, And be learning this stuff from Buddhism that somehow offers a much bigger vision. But we don't know how to get from here to there. Sometimes we have a feeling, maybe. Sometimes we get excited about a teaching, like, oh, I get it, and then the next minute, right, you're like, well, what did I get? Right? What was that? So here's the poem called A Peaceful Life. Being told that it is impossible, one believes in despair. Is that so? Being told that it is possible, one believes in excitement. That's right. But whichever is chosen, it doesn't match one's heart neatly. It doesn't fit. And being asked, well, what is unfitting? I don't know what it is. But my heart knows somehow. I feel irresistible desire to know what a mystery human is. As to this mystery, clarifying, knowing how to live, knowing how to walk with people, demonstrating and teaching, this is the Buddha. For my human eyes, I feel it's really impossible to become Buddha. But this I, like letter I, me, regarding what the Buddha does, vows to practice, vows to aspire, to be resolute, tells myself, yes, I will. Just practice right here, now, and achieve continuity, endlessly, forever. This is living in vow. Here is one's peaceful life found. Like right here, right here. Being told that it's impossible, like life, right? Practice, whatever it is, being told that it's impossible. One believes in despair. Is that so? Being told that it is possible, one believes in excitement. That's right. But whichever it is, it does not fit one's heart neatly. Being asked what is unfitting, I don't know what it is. Right? Something's just a little bit off there. But my heart knows, somehow. I feel irresistible desire to know, and what a mystery human is. As to this mystery, clarifying, knowing how to live, knowing how to walk with people, demonstrating and teaching, this is the Buddha. For my human eyes, I feel it's really impossible to become Buddha. It's impossible. But this I, regarding what the Buddha does, vows to practice, to aspire, to be resolute, and tells myself, yes, I will. I will do this. Just practice here and now. Achieve continuity endlessly forever. This is living in vow. Herein is one's peaceful life found. I wonder if Shohaku Okamura's book about the Zen chants called Living in Vow is from this poem, the title. Maybe it's from this poem. Or is it Living by Vow in his case? By vow, yeah. And here's a little more advice from Ruijing about putting this into our practice. One time, Dogen went into the room and Ruijing wanted to tell him all about Kinhin. So let's see what we can learn. In the middle of the night, what incredible thing is he going to tell me? How to do walking meditation, yeah. Ruijing said, one of the most essential practices for training in the monks' hall is the practice of slow walking. There are many elders here, and there are nowadays who do not know about this practice. In fact, only a few people know how to do it. To do the slow walking practice, you coordinate the steps with the breathing. You walk without looking at the feet, without bending over or looking up. You go slowly, so slowly it looks like you're not moving at all. Do not sway when you walk. Then he walked back and forth several times in the great light storehouse hall to show me how to do it, and said to me, nowadays, I am the only one who knows this slow walking practice. Please remember this practice. Dogen often lapses in his later writings into this kind of arrogant, like I'm the only one who gets it, so maybe that's where he learned it, I don't know. I'm the only one. And here's the last thing I want to bring up, which is right back to the main point again. So the journal kind of goes always back to this main point through different side roads. I asked the teacher, the nature of all things is either good, bad, or neutral. Which of these is the Buddha Dharma? The nature of things is either good, bad, or neutral. Which of these things is the Buddha Dharma? And Ruijing said, the Buddha Dharma goes beyond these three. So that's our life's study right there. To really recognize that, like Dogen, when he asked that question, our impulse, our evaluation, our reflex to divide everything up into good and bad is so prevalent, it's so fast, it's so convincing that we think it's all true. That's a good thing, that's a bad thing. Maybe that one's kind of neutral, I don't care about that, but good and bad. Like it, don't like it. Good and evil, right? And it gets like pretty subtle too. It can just be a subtle little kind of coloring of everything, right? Right? And it's happening all the time, right? All the time. I think our practice helps us see by slowing down a little bit. Like, oh, look at that, I like this moment, I don't like that moment, I like this idea of sitting here peacefully, and I don't like the actual experience right now, right? I don't like my knee hurting, whatever it is. Oh wait, it's not hurting. And the way our life can become a hamster wheel, right, of a never-ending quest for more of the stuff that we like, more experiences that are pleasant to us, and fewer that we don't like. And maybe if we just arranged everything the right way, right house, right relationship, right job, right long list, we'll finally get there, but we know we never will. What a way to live, And the funny thing, too, is even if we did somehow get there, to where everything was completely pleasant, there are teachings and even some psychology to suggest that that wouldn't be great either. That would ultimately be unsatisfying if everything was what we now think would be satisfying. It does seem we need some change, perhaps some stress. And stress isn't all bad, right? Getting hungry is a stress, stressor. Then we remember to eat. So maybe spiritual pain is good because we remember to practice in the same way. So Dogen's asking about this, since things are good, bad, and indifferent, what is the Buddha nature, what is it, Will it give us peace? Will it help us? And you would think on the face of it that the answer would be good, right? The teachings are good, right? They're good. They're a good thing. But Ruijing doesn't say good. He actually, instead of saying they're this, that, or the other, he gives a teaching. A teaching about seeing through good and bad. Teaching about freedom from this incredible habit of sorting things in that way and everything it leads to in our world, which includes some pretty bad things and some good things, I suppose, yeah. That the Buddha Dharma, the teachings, the practice are about seeing through the mirage of good and bad. And seeing through the more pervasive part of this that thinks one thing seems inherently good and another thing seems inherently bad. You can fill in the blanks about what it is for you. And is that actually true? So, thinking about this some more, I think Rindout is right, Sometimes there's good and bad, light and dark. We're down and we want to be back up a little bit. We want to rekindle the light. We need some kindling. That's not wrong, right? But I think Ruijing's right in a deeper way, maybe. that maybe there's a way of freeing ourselves from needing to keep that flame going and really embrace the dark and allow there to be darkness and light, and to not see them as opposites the way we do. To see the light in the darkness and the dark in the light. We chant something like that, don't we? So a few more thoughts, more or less connected to Dogen's Hokyoki. And I thought it'd be interesting to have a little discussion together with a few friends about the dark. How do you practice when it's dark? Is it about fixing it? Is it about accepting it? Is it about kindling? How do you understand the darkness of your life and in your life and the darkness of our world? How do you practice with that? So maybe you could even silently find a couple of partners, so groups of 3 would be lovely, and maybe Rachel, if you don't mind bringing me that bell. This is kind of a deep and dark topic, I know. So let's just trust the situation and see what comes up. Maybe a lot, maybe nothing. Maybe elevators will keep buzzing and buzzing. If you end up in a group of 4, try to not be in a group of 4, but find a group of 3. So like David's on his own at the end there, maybe Judith can go that way. And if we can't avoid a group of 4, let's have two groups of 2 instead. Looks like we pulled off 3s. Oh, we're a multiple of 3, how nice. It's fortuitous. So I don't know if you know this kind of stylized conversation, very structured thing, where one person's talking and the others are listening, like really just listening, with open hearts, not asking questions or making suggestions, just listening. And the speaker gets some time to be signaled with the bell, and it really is your time. You can say a lot or a little. You can close your eyes and breathe. You can see what else there is to say. You can decide to talk about the mariners instead. It's completely your time. And then when the bell rings, to wrap up your thought, even if there's more to say. Of course there's more to say. What do you think? So the lifetime. And drop into silence so we have space for the next person, okay? So let's try this. It's pretty structured, but it can create some freedom and some social awkwardness. Right, of course. It's weird. So maybe somebody can courageously signal with a finger flick or a grin that they're willing to be the first person. You figured it out? First person. How do you practice in the dark? Whatever that means for you. I'll put you guys in a breakout here so you can talk. There you go. You heard all the instructions, huh? Your mute's on, so I won't be able to hear you. There should be a button for joining the breakout room, which will be the 4 of you. So finishing the thought. And then if you haven't started yet, second person. Let's just stay focused on our topic here too. Don't worry about other people. How do you practice with the dark? And our third person.